Mr. President, Commissioners, it's now 12 o'clock.
I know this is a special meeting that we've called, and it is a work sessions, but I would appreciate if you would join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic
For which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much for joining us, all of you, staff members, commissioners, and a few members of the public. We will begin today. We have 2 items of work sessions, and then we will have an executive session afterwards. But the first work session is on our bicycle and pedestrian performance measures, some preliminary recommendations. And you should know that our staff, together with our committee folks and chairman, have been working very, very diligently on this, and I haven't kept completely on top of it, so I'm prepared to be impressed. And because it's Ryan, I'm pretty sure we will be. Take it away, Ryan.
President Goldthorpe, Commission, Ryan Head, Planning Manager here at ACHD. Thank you for that introduction. I hope to impress today. Really, we are here at the direction of the Commission to return with a draft bike and pedestrian performance measure that could be used to evaluate the experience of the bicyclist and pedestrian. We have worked closely with our advisory committees, as we'll show you, and as well as with a nationally recognized consulting firm to develop very quickly a bike and pedestrian performance measure that we can move forward towards implementing. In your packet, just of note, you received a copy of the draft criteria. I'm going to go over that at a high level today, but if there are any specific questions, please feel free. We can discuss those or where those came from. As we began this effort, we started with 3 questions. What is the metric intended to measure? Do we have the information to measure that? And then what's the impact? Really, we started with this first question in mind and worked with our advisory committees to determine what should it be measuring. For vehicles, measuring capacity is a standard practice, but our bike and pedestrian advisory committees did not believe that capacity was the right thing to be measuring for that experience. But we did develop a measure that met these other 4 criteria. We also were careful in doing this to ensure that we were developing a metric that's actually measurable, that we had the data to do this. One thing of note that will help in this process is the upcoming evaluation and inventory of bike lane widths. That is occurring this summer, and that will help further inform this process and the metrics that are used. And then the last question is, what's the impact? How do we use this? Really, from the outset, as looking at this from a staff level, this is primarily a design informing tool. It would help us in scoping to identify the type of facilities we should be designing, and then in design to review and to evaluate trade-offs. But there's other things that we are able to look at, and so that will be the next steps in this process moving forward from today. This was the schedule we started with. Really, again, this has been a 2-month process, but we have worked very closely with the advisory committees, and then we have these next steps still to go, with the intent that we would have this finalized by September and fully implemented into next fiscal year. Just a summary of the outreach and the effort that's been made. This is a lot of meetings that has occurred in the last couple months. Very grateful for the participation of the advisory committees and the subcommittees in particular, who worked very closely and attended in lengthy sessions to talk through different alternatives, to give us input as to what we should be measuring, and then to select and make the recommendation. And what we are presenting to you today has their thumbs up that this is what should be moving forward. Now, This is a process that continually can be refined, but what we have before you has their endorsement. So getting into specific criteria for bicyclists, the performance measure that has been selected is the level of traffic stress. This is a measure that reflects on the comfort and safety for different varieties of bicyclists. So the measure is a scale of 1 to 4, with 1 being that really all ages and abilities would feel comfortable on this facility, moving down to 4, where really just the strong and experienced who would ride regardless would be willing to ride there. So that's kind of the varying levels that it is. Really, the 1 and 2 is really kind of the target range where most agencies look to have facilities that are comfortable for really most individuals. This really has been identified in recognition by our consultants that this is the industry best practice that's moving forward. We looked at bike level of service, we looked at other methods, but really this is becoming the emerging best practice there. The other thing that the committee really liked about this is that it's adaptable to local conditions. For instance, our bike advisory committee really wanted to ensure that we took into account the condition of the roadway and how that affects the experience. So using our pavement condition index, we're able to have a threshold where if you're over this, or if you're under that level of condition, then it would be your identified level of stress would be adjusted by 1 level. It'd be one more higher level of stress. There's different tables. The way this tool works is you use a table to identify based on speeds and conditions and other factors there along the road, and the type of facility that it is, being mixed traffic, so no dedicated facility, a bike lane buffered. This would be our level 2 facilities as in our common language, and then raised and protected or multi-use paths, that level 3 type facility. And so based on those, what type of rating you would get, and then the different kinds of intersections that a bicyclist might experience. I'll show you here in a few moments an example of this applied. But really, you would select which table applies to the condition. You could use the current and compare that to the planned to look at how that would vary and how we're benefiting that. But you can look at it in different categories. But by doing that, you can identify where you fall in the expected level of traffic stress. For pedestrians, the committee reviewed 3 different methods, again, a level of service and then another pedestrian quality environment measure, but ultimately decided to come back to the pedestrian level of traffic stress and recommended this to move forward. One, it's comparable in scale to your bike level of traffic stress, so you have equal items. But it's interesting in looking at this, even though there were like different ideas for how you could do this, this really is an emerging practice. There's been ways that are out there, but it's kind of changing because with vehicles and bikes, they're generally going to operate in a specific location, but pedestrians have a lot more flexibility where they decide to walk. The committee appreciated this being adaptable to local conditions and included some adjustment factors for that. The interesting thing that changes in the case of a pedestrian is when you look at the segment tables, well, you use all 3 tables in this case, and whichever is the highest level of stress is the score that would be rated. So it's kind of a weakest link perspective, and takes into account the present, if a sidewalk exists, if there's a buffer and how wide that buffer is, and then the width and condition, which that condition was important from the perspective of our Americans with Disability Act Advisory Committee, who wanted to make sure we took it into account. And so we can use the inventory that's been done to help us gauge what condition a roadway is in or a sidewalk is in, and how that would then rate in this case. So this is just an example, and it's a little bit hard to see, but hopefully I'll describe this for you. This is Leadville, where we've done the Leadville Bikeway. On the left is your bicycle level of traffic stress. On the right is your pedestrian level of traffic stress. You can see after our application there on Leadville, you have a low stress route. It is low stress for all ages and abilities for the most part. There are a couple locations where the volumes increase the level of stress slightly. There at Boise Avenue and Leadville, just south of that, it's a level 2 because there's a school there and there's a lot of traffic that happens right at that location. And so the volumes are just naturally going to increase the stress level. You also have one of the pedestrian crossings up at Beacon. That's a longer distance crossing there, and so it receives a level of traffic stress too that most adults would still feel comfortable, but maybe not your youngest children. In proximity to Boise State, you'd expect it to be a lot more older or adults as opposed to children. But you can generally see that based on the improvements that were made, the crossings, looking at the intersections, that we've been fairly successful according to this metric in achieving a lower stress facility. When you look at the pedestrian side of this, you kind of have scores that are a little all over the place, and there's different reasons for that. Interestingly enough, in the section of Leadville north of Boise Avenue up to Beacon Street, you're generally in a level of traffic stress 1, but there are no sidewalks there. The reason for this is because there is low volumes and low speeds. So that's reflective that it would still be comfortable to walk in that type of environment. However, in places where you do have sidewalks south of Boise Avenue, it's actually not of great quality. It may be less than 4 feet, or it may be in poor condition. And that would then show that would be a higher increase. And so this is really effective to help us as staff when we're looking at a facility to say what type of investments would be needed, where would they most be needed, and how can we then have the impact that we're trying to have to build complete streets for all users. So our next steps now is to look at and continue our internal working to review implementation opportunities, look at that prioritization, look at how we use this in design, to continue to develop some draft tools for how do we do this to put it into practice, right? The measure for itself really says very little besides kind of what's the level of stress there. But if we don't implement it and use it for something, it won't really have much meaning long term. So this is the steps that we would look to take. We'd continue to use our advisory committees to review those recommendations and those actions, and then we would plan to bring back a document. You saw a draft version of this in your packet, but bring back a document to you for adoption later this fiscal year. With that, I will stand for any questions.
Are there any questions? Jim?
Mr. President, I don't necessarily have a question. It's just like Ryan and his team get an Academy Award because this is a tremendous amount of work. They have produced something that is now that we're ready for prime time. Our job is to make sure that everybody turns out in the theaters when we lay it out there, and then it gets incorporated, make sure it's implemented. Implement. So it's really helpful, so helpful to see this. And I know I've talked to lots of people who have had input on this, the people on our advisory committees, and I just can't thank you enough for just persisting. And I know there's obstacles ahead that this, when you say, oh, we need to draft, implement, and action, it's easy to say that. It's another thing to then go to someone who's done things a certain way always in another department, and ask them to change the way they've done things. Developers on the outside will be looking and say, well, why are you asking about this now? You haven't asked about this in the past. But I'll tell you, it's a wonderful tool, the direction when we're talking to neighbors, and they can see, actually lay it out. Here's the reason why it's important we're going to work on this street instead of this one, because we've done this analysis, and the level of traffic stress for people who want to walk and bike in this neighborhood is actually worse than the one you're experiencing. So this is why, and we have to prioritize, and we don't have all the money in the world to do it all at once. So I just think this is fantastic. I think in the long run, we'll also then look at how useful and how much we can improve the old-fashioned LOS for cars, because that's really about stress too. You're very true. You say, well, people who walk and bike often have more options. They can walk and bike in different places if it's too stressful, whereas drivers can't. It's like they can only drive on a road, and if they're only given one road between one destination to one destination, it's very stressful. So I think this will give us the ability to continually update and improve how we measure things. And I'm just thrilled to death after all these years of talking about, let's get the metrics, let's get some tools, and knowing that people are using them around the country, that we're catching up and doing that. And I just know a number of people have spoken to me and said how much they appreciate Ryan. Ryan doesn't just sit and take notes. He actually incorporates people's input and goes back and says, is this what you meant? And then continually revises and improves, and it's superb. Thank you.
So what you're
Mr.
saying is
President?
you're okay
Mr.
with this,
President?
Jim? That was a joke.
Yeah.
Mary?
Mr. President,
You bet.
I just want to tag on there about the Oscar going to. Ryan does a tremendous job. Kudos to you, Ryan. This is so impressive, and to everyone that's involved. And I really appreciate that we are having all the advisory committee members involved in this right from the get-go, rather than coming to us and then going back out and getting feedback. So I think having them right there engaged through the whole process, I think it's really going to yield some huge benefits. So once again, great job. And I think this has been long overdue, and really, really impressed with the results, and look forward to the future updates. So thank you, Ryan.
Thanks, Mary. Alexis, are you there?
Mr. President,
Yes.
I'm here. Ryan, great presentation. I also would like to echo Commissioners May and Hansen's thoughts. I just have one quick question. On complete streets, we meant to design our roadways for all users. 8 to 80 is that common age range. And Ryan, you'd mentioned kind of and correct me if I've misheard you, but just looking at the levels of stress, like we're shooting for level 2 in most places, or could you kind of walk me through that a little bit more? Because, with our Complete Streets policy, it's trying to build for everybody. So could you just walk me through that connection?
Absolutely. President Goldthorpe, Commissioner Pickering, really the target would be 1 and 2. You want, if you hit 1, you also get 2. You get everyone else, but it may not be necessarily as feasible in every situation, right, due to conditions in the area. But the target would be to shoot for 1, but 1 and 2 being really the goal where we'd like to get our facilities.
Thank you. That makes a lot of sense. And thank you so much for working with the advisory committees on this. And I just really, really appreciate it. And I'm really, really impressed. And I can't wait to hopefully be able to use this in my conversations with neighborhoods and folks, and have them be more, have tools at the ready for them to make informed decisions about what their priorities are. So thank you.
Thank you. Dave, anything?
Yeah, just a couple of quick questions. In my background, I'm familiar with, traffic analysis and looking at level of service for highway segments and intersections and so on. And of course, with those, those are always based upon, vehicles per lane, per hour, vehicle minutes of delay at an intersection, and so on and so forth. But it looks like, as I look at the bicycle and pedestrian, what we're calling measurements, it all looks kind of subjective. Are there any objective criteria that are being measured here to determine level of, I guess, what's the word? We're talking about comfort, the level of comfort with the bicycle and pedestrian facilities. Is it all just subjective criteria? Is there anything objective that's measurable?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner McKinney, the criteria was originally developed and based on a study done by the Moneta Transportation Institute. And they did quite a bit of surveying, quite a bit of, yes, there is, because it's a level of stress, it's reflective of subjective criteria, correct? But they used quite a bit of analysis to determine and to gauge who would feel comfortable in these types of situations. And that's what it's intended to reflect, is what type of user would feel comfortable and be safe in these types of situations, using things like number of traffic lanes, the posted speeds, those other types of things that then impact an individual's use.
Okay. So, because I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, if we set as our objective, making sure that all of our facilities are satisfy this level 1 or level 2 stress level. Of course, it kind of goes without saying that the lower stress facilities are always going to cost more than the higher stress facilities. Would you agree with that?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner McKinney, I think that kind of depends. It depends on the volumes, the speeds. When you have higher volumes and higher speeds, yes, it requires more protection, requires farther buffering or other types of things, and that would definitely increase the cost on a higher speed, higher volume facility.
So a larger, a wider bike lane, a more protected or buffered bike lane or sidewalk, what have you, all of that adds cost to any project, right?
Correct.
So if we have to make trade-offs between, build 5 miles of highway with a level 1 facility, or build 6 miles of highway with a level 3 facility, that's the trade-off we're making, isn't it? When it comes to the dollars that we have to spend. A fair statement?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner McKinney, ultimately that's what we look to the commission to decide the value and what would be the decision there. The one thing to note, the assumption under this guidance is that a raised bike lane, a protected bike lane, or a multi-use path would automatically be a level 1 facility for segments. Now, when you come to intersections, that's a different conversation, right? That's a little bit different, and that's really where you'd have the greatest exposure, but it's assumed level of traffic stress 1 with a couple of adjustment factors in there depending on the number of driveways and other things. So, which is where you get to that place where you can't, in some cases, say a major commercial facility where you have a lot of driveways, you're likely not going to be able to achieve a level of traffic stress 1 because of the built environment that we can't necessarily control.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. I can't tell you how much easier it is for me to understand all this discussion when it's made more subjective as this has. And I'm grateful that there is some data that's being analyzed to do this, because it's easier for me to understand a level of stress than it is to try and incorporate what we know as level of service into somebody dodging traffic on foot or on a bicycle. And so my gratitude. I have a question, and I'll use an example of where we've been working around Maple Grove Elementary School. In the future, will we be looking to possibly prioritize what we figure are the kids' routes to school by virtue of what the parents tell us in our public information meetings, and make those easier to navigate for people on bicycles or pedestrians so that we can keep mom and the kids out of their cars?
Mr. Chair, that has been the direction of the commission, is to prioritize safe routes to school to date, and our prioritization system still assumes that. We would look at in close detail the type of facilities we're recommending. Again, your level 1 or your higher or your level 3 bike facilities are actually level of traffic stress 1. Confusing, we got to figure this out. But ultimately that's the case. But then when you get into the pedestrian facility, it gets a little bit, you have to look at that. When you have crossings, what kinds of treatments do you do there to make it lower stress? And that's where this is helpful in design, is it gives us some options that we can use to buy down the level of traffic stress, I guess you could say, for someone walking across the street or other types of things. So it helps us identify what could we do to make this more or lower traffic stress for individuals.
That's much appreciated. And as usual, thank you for a very thorough job.
Thank you.
And that'll be it for this. Yes.
Just one more thing. This Ryan, I think, has really helped us understand how all of our tools are largely subjective. I know we've had many discussions in the past about level of service for vehicles and the assumption that is created that they are purely objective, when in fact they're actually quite subjective, and that we changed our description of them in our own policies to say they're not really standards, they're planning thresholds, because it's going to vary. When drivers have a choice, their level of stress of how long it'll take to go through an intersection is different than if that's the only road they can take, or it's a time of day. They'll be more likely to tolerate it taking a long time at the peak hour than at another hour. So those tools that we use to measure the movement of vehicles are highly subjective, and that this really helps to illustrate. There's a lot of subjective factors that go into that. It's the experience that people, whether they're walking, biking, or driving, are going to have when they use the facility. A driver doesn't have a choice; they have to drive on the road. But somebody who walks will either not walk and then drive, which we don't necessarily want them to do because that adds to congestion, or they may have another choice. This, I really appreciate that this actually does illustrate that it's not pure science, it's pure math. It actually is. It's very much an art to put together what is going to work the best, and that the one thing we want to do is, when we spend the public's money to build something, we want the public to use it. And the way they use it is these tools will tell us whether and how they're going to use it.
Okay, then Ryan, we're done. And we're going to go to our work session number 2, which is the 2020 Capital Improvements Plan. This is an action item, so we will be discussing and voting. But just as a little bit of background here, for those of you who took advantage of the link that was sent to you to last August's meeting, where if you watch that, you'll remember that yours truly made an attempt at the end of the meeting to make some modifications to our CIP. And it was suggested and voted on that would be better done today. Today was the month of March, was what was decided on, to have an interim CIP meeting, which this is. And so I hope you have all had opportunities to discuss with staff what you would like to see, possibly some changes, if any. And if you haven't, bear with us today, and understand that we're going to have this meeting again in August. And who was it? John Lovitz on Saturday Night Live used to have a bit that was called Get to Know Me. I would say get to know staff with this between now and August, and then on a continual basis. We'll turn the time now over to Gary Inselman for a presentation, and I know he's put a lot into this.
All right. Thank you, President Goldthorpe, Commissioners. Just for the record, Gary Inselman, Deputy Director, Development Technical Services. So this is a work session about the Commission Directive recommendations from Commissioner Goldthorpe at our public hearing for the Capital Improvements Plan last August. So I'll review those recommendations one at a time with you, have a few comments on some of them, and then summarize potential impacts to the Capital Improvements Plan and our impact fee rates. We'll go over our master street map and some area plans and present a few alternatives for your consideration. This is the list of the 9 recommendations from Commissioner Goldthorpe that was given to us last August with direction to come back by March, so today. So I will go through these one at a time with you. Just for a reminder, this is a map of our adopted 2020 Capital Improvements Plan. There are 147 road segments on this map. 16 of them are 6 to 7 lane road segments. 73 of them are 5 lane road segments, and 58 of them are 2 or 3 lane road segments. So the first recommendation was to constrain all roads going west from Black Cat to the county line from 5 lanes to 3, while preserving for 5 the right-of-way for a future 5-lane road, with the exception of Franklin Road. So that boiled down to just 2 road segments that we actually have going west of Black Cat other than Franklin Road. So that's 2 road segments of Ustick Road from Black Cat to McDermott and McDermott to Star. As you are probably aware, the city has extended services out to that area. The Waihe High School is nearly complete in its construction when it'll open this August. And just recently, the West Ada School District approved the attendance area for that school, which was different from what was submitted with their development application. So we actually have more students needing to travel from east to west on Ustick Road to make it to that school. The attendance area actually goes all the way to Meridian Road. So there will be additional impact to Ustick Road for that reason, as well as some other subdivisions that have been approved or under construction in the area. And another consideration for this is that what we list in our capital improvements plan does matter to other agencies. In the past, when ITD rebuilt the Black Cat overpass, they built it as a 2-lane bridge because our capital improvements plan only showed a 3-lane road. We're now planning a 5-lane road, but we have a 2-lane overpass. So this is important to remember,
Gary,
when we look at this.
And the overpass was just built a few years ago.
Yes.
I remember that well.
This is a map of the area. You can see the Waihe High School site over on the left. We got some future subdivisions in Canyon County, or current subdivisions. To the north of the high school, this has been preliminary platted. This collector roadway will run the entire mile. We have the Oak subdivisions. We've got the parcel for our future Ustick Yard over here. And this area along Black Cat has been preliminary platted and is under development by the Brighton Corporation.
Gary, another quick
Yes,
question. Had ITD seen on our CIP that we had preserved for 5 lanes on Black Cat Road, would that at least have inspired a phone call to us prior to their making all their plans?
Well, President Goldthorpe, we did discuss with them at the time that we were planning a future 5-lane, but they were looking at what was funded in our capital improvements plan at the time of their investment.
Interesting, because most of the CIP is not funded.
A good portion is, but
Yeah.
we have some unfunded, you're right.
Thank you.
The second recommendation was looking at the Cloverdale corridor. Again, preserving for 5 lanes, building for 3. That would impact 5 road segments south of Amity and 4 intersections. Of note, we are currently acquiring the right-of-way for 5 lanes on the west side of that corridor in coordination with Idaho Power with their transmission line project. And that is running from Overland clear to Columbia. There was enough development out there prior to this effort that I think we were acquiring 11 or 13 parcels, and we'll have that whole west side purchased for the future 5-lane width. The east side is a very different matter. Some segments developed through the county in the 70s, and we preserved for 3 lanes, and some developed through the county following Boise's land use plan, and we preserved for 5 lanes, and a few segments are undeveloped on the east side. The third recommendation was to build for 5 lanes on Linder Road between State and Chinden while preserving for 7. That is actually the preferred alternative that the commission did adopt in the Linder Road concept study, so no action required. That is what we're doing. And as part of that adoption of the concept study, the bridges will be built to that full 7-lane section, but the initial construction of the road would be to 5. The fourth recommendation, Linder Road between Victory and Hubbard. There are no road segments in the adopted CIP that meet that criteria. The fifth recommendation has been of topic lately with the Maple Grove Road design for the project from Victory to Amity. So that was programmed to begin design this year. The next segment to the south, Amity to Lake Hazel, is programmed for design in 24, and we are already under design for the Maple Grove Amity intersection, which began last year. And in the adopted capital improvements plan, the Maple Grove Road segment Victory to Amity is a current 5-lane deficiency, so it is needed for the current traffic as well as future planned growth.
Gary, just another curiosity question because of what the director explained to us, I believe, last week, as far as the design for this particular section being 2 designs. If that was changed in the CIP, that would certainly not change what we could possibly decide on with the design in a few months, correct?
President Goldthorpe, no, you could make any decision you want, but if it's changed in the CIP, it will change how you can pay for it. With not on this particular road segment since the deficiency, but on the other road segments.
Right, okay. Thank you.
Mr. President?
Yes.
I just have a quick question, Gary. Could you go back one more slide? So could you talk, because again, I have so much to learn on this. Could you talk me through what you mean by Maple Grove Road, Victory to Amity as a current 5-lane deficiency? Like, what exactly do you mean by that? And what are the, projections or data measures that you're using to make that statement?
President Goldthorpe, Commissioner Pickering, that means that the existing traffic volumes exceed our planning level thresholds for a 3-lane roadway. So to meet our programmed or adopted planning level thresholds, the road would need to be widened to a 5-lane road as planned on the master street map in the prior capital improvements plans. But because it's an existing deficiency, we can't.
The current, sorry, there's a little bit of a delay, sorry. So the current, say that again, the current
volumes of traffic exceed that
so
planning
is that
level
just
threshold.
at peak hour, or is that all times of day?
President Goldthorpe, Commissioner Pickering, our capital improvements plan is based on the PM peak hour.
Okay.
One other
Mr.
question
President?
along those lines, Gary. When you mentioned about figuring how to pay for it in the CIP, if we reserve for 5 and plan for 3 on some of this unfunded, really unplanned stretches that we have, as we get closer to the time when we might be building it, so that it can accurately be inserted into the 5-year work plan, would we be able to say, okay, it looks like we're going to be building for 5 here or only building for 3, so that you don't have to worry at the last moment whether we have enough impact fees to satisfy the need?
President Goldthorpe, I'm not sure I quite
Okay.
followed your
I'll say it
question, but
another
I think
way.
I addressed this in a few minutes.
Yeah. Oh, you're going to in a few minutes?
Yeah.
Then I'll shut up. Thanks.
Mr. President?
Yes.
Yeah, Gary, and I would just echo Commissioner Pickering's comment. To my mind, it's not a deficiency, and that we have to be careful about using pejorative terms, because one could argue the new widening north of Victory, between Victory and Overland, is creating a deficiency based upon the connectivity between 2 neighborhoods that now have to face a 5-lane corridor. So the deficiency is basically the level of stress a driver might feel they would be entitled to get from one end of that road to the other in 1 minute, and instead it will take them 1 minute and 40 seconds or something like that. So to me, that's not a deficiency. It's a reminder they're driving through a neighborhood. So I think it's important when we say, we describe this is that, yes, we made some projections in the past about what some future driver might experience as they're driving along this area, and that actually the source of their stress is not the width of the road. The source of their stress is the fact that there isn't connectivity and they don't have many choices. They have to either go all the way to 5 Mile or down to Cole if they want to go through on a northerly or southerly direction. And so it's real important, I think, as we're describing these, that we just simply be as straightforward. In the past, we projected out, we want to build 5 lanes. There are neighborhoods here now, and so I would not describe this as a deficiency. The other is that there are things we can move up in the 5-year plan that are CIP or impact fee eligible to use those monies if we move things back and we say, okay, we just want to build for 3 and to simply preserve for 5 for some future date down the road, that we can move things up. There are things such as the Linder Bridge, which I think there's a tremendous amount of interest in moving up that is impact fee eligible. In the meantime, we can also then look at amending our ordinance to make it consistent, hopefully with a broader statute that is working its way through the legislature either this year or next year. And I think that's really important, and not to drive our decisions simply because that's how we want to spend money that is available from one pool versus another.
Mr. President,
Yes.
I have to admit, Commissioner Hansen's discussion here has confused me a little bit. Gary, tell me, this statement at the bottom of this slide, it says Amity is a current 5-lane deficiency in the CIP. Does that mean that current projections for traffic volume on this section of Maple Grove from Victory to Amity are that it needs a 5-lane section to have an acceptable level of service? Is that what this phrase means?
President Goldthorpe, Commissioner McKinney, that's correct. The current volume of traffic would require a 5-lane section to meet our current adopted planning level thresholds for level service.
Okay, so that's talking about the traffic that's on Maple Grove Road right now and projected into the future, correct?
President Goldthorpe, Commissioner McKinney, that's the volumes today. We then project forward to 2040 in the capital improvements plan, and that 5-lane section would still be sufficient at that time. But today's volumes exceed the thresholds for a 3-lane section, so it needs to be widened to 5 to meet an acceptable level of service standard today.
Okay, so Commissioner Hansen's statement that planning to widen it because it's what we want to build, would you agree that that's an accurate statement? Or would you say that that's really not accurate, that what we want to build is what the traffic says is needed right now?
Mr. President, Commissioner McKinney, let me answer that as the director, as
Sure.
opposed to as the deputy director. We're not going to question the accuracy or inaccuracy of a commissioner's statement across the board. What we're presenting to you are the facts that we know right now. And as factually, this is the measurement system that we use today based on what the commission has directed us to do based on national standards. You are well aware of those.
Right.
Factually, any discussion on a level of stress for drivers is, from my perspective, a little premature, because that is something we haven't even considered at this point in time. I do agree with Commissioner Hansen on this. You know, it is stressful at times to have to go 5 miles out of your way and such. I get that. But what we're presenting to you are facts based on the commission's and current commission direction, current commissional policy standards, and what national standards are. So I really don't want the staff to get into a back and forth with the commission on who's more accurate or not, if you understand that, sir.
No, I understand.
Okay, I
Absolutely.
appreciate that.
Thank you, I appreciate that, and let's continue getting all the facts.
Thank you. And President
Commissioner,
Goldthorpe,
Yes, Jim?
Mr. This might help. Gary, are there roads in the county that we are not widening? We've constrained them. They're just simply not going to be widened. But that they do already reach levels of stress, level of service F or E or F, even though, and so that we have constrained them. We just live with it because of a variety of factors, extreme expense to buy the property, all kinds of things. But there are places in the county where we have constrained the road width.
President Goldthorpe, Commissioner Hansen, that's correct. In the master street map, the commission has adopted what the future lane widths will be on these major corridors, and some of them have been constrained to a maximum lane configuration that will not meet future needs based on our modeling projections of the traffic in the future.
Yeah, I remember the big one was Beacon Light Road. At least since I've been on the commission, right, Mary? Yeah, another question for me, and this has to do with our finances, and you can both stand there because you might both want to address this. If we modify the CIP so that we're preserving for 5 and possibly going to build for 3, will that free up money from our budgets for the next 5 years or so to use a little differently and maybe solve additional problems that we would not feel comfortable solving if we were just going straight out on a 5-lane plan?
Commissioner Goldthorpe, again, I've got a summary at the end of your 9 items that kind of goes through that.
Okay.
It doesn't really free up some money, but it certainly shifts it around a bit.
I like to think that I'm thinking ahead here, but actually I'm not.
I would like to point out when we do constrain corridors, we are doing that in conjunction with our land use partners to make sure that everyone is well aware of the future impacts. And that's part of the reason that, as I presented in multiple presentations before on the capital improvements plan, that even at build out of this plan, full build out, congestion will rise in this county by over 300%. Because
Right.
we have constrained roads and we can't keep widening to address all of the needs. There are other measures that have to be taken moving into the future.
And you just said something really interesting. And I'm thinking here of Linder Road, north of the interstate, where the city wants to do one thing and we think the prudent thing is to do another. So we're already in disagreement on some of our projections for the level of service and the type of facility that we would like to present or produce in the future. So I'm glad you said it that way, because I know we're not always 100% in sync with our municipal partners as far as how we think or they think on these. Now I'll be quiet for a few minutes.
And Commissioner Goldthorpe, if I could just, on the term deficiency, we use that because that's in the statute. We're required to address the existing deficiencies. So that's why I have to use that term in the capital improvements plan.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Gary.
So your number 6 recommendation was a portion of the Star Road corridor from State all the way down to Ustick that would impact 3 road segments and 3 intersections. Number 7 recommendation, Black Cat, Franklin to Amity. Again, 3 road segments and 2 intersections. Number 8 was 5 Mile Road, south of Amity. Afraid I copied over a typo there. It's constrained to 3, preserved for 5, build to 3. 1 road segment meets that criteria, 5 Mile Amity Lake Hazel. We would like to say that we agree with Commissioner Goldthorpe. We should reevaluate this corridor, and I'm going to go into a lot more detail on that in some future slides.
I know that's your neighborhood, huh?
I do live over by Cloverdale.
Okay. Yeah.
But we do recommend reevaluation of 5 Mile Road south of Victory, which would impact 2 road segments in the CIP and a couple of intersections. And then,
Mr. President,
Yes.
Gary, do you mind going back one more slide for me? Could you tell me a little bit about how staff comes to agree that the segment should be re-examined? So what's kind of that process that you all go through to re-examine and then put that in here and share that with us?
President Goldthorpe, Commissioner Pickering, if you would indulge me, I have a few slides later in the presentation that goes into more detail on 5 Mile specifically, and I think I can address that for you.
No problem, thank you.
And then your 9th recommendation was on any of these road segments that we talked about previously, if there were multi-lane roundabouts planned to build a single-lane roundabout and preserve right-of-way for the multi-lane in the future. That would include 6 intersections previously listed with those road segments, along with a few mid-mile intersections that would be impacted as well. I'll start with the roundabouts. To construct a single-lane roundabout and then expand a multi-lane in the future, it's pretty much an entire rebuild of the intersection. There are ways, like the 3rd bullet shows, we can design it with a single circulation lane while building the full footprint, and that's what we're doing currently right now at 10 Mile and Amity.
Right.
We're building that full footprint. We extend the splitter islands out so we have a single circulation lane, and we can modify that in the future when we need both circulation lanes through the roundabout. If we were to just build a single lane and then reconstruct it as a multi-lane or dual lane in the future, we're looking at approximately $10 million in throwaway costs.
So what you're saying is that my language, as far as what I would suggest to change to the CIP, be modified to something that would describe what we're doing at 10 Mile and Amity?
That would be our recommendation, yes.
That's what I thought. Okay. Well, I'll let Steve figure out that wording then.
Mr. President,
Yes.
Gary, could you just explain really quick, what do you mean by throwaway costs?
That means if we pay to build a single lane roundabout and then have to rip it up in the future to build a multi-lane roundabout, we've lost that investment in the single lane roundabout. That's a throwaway cost.
Thank you.
Mr. President?
Mr. Gary,
Yes,
do you have a-
Dave?
Well, just, so that's $10 million per roundabout?
Oh, yeah.
Or is that total for the list of ones that you mentioned?
President Goldthorpe, Commissioner McKinney, that would be total for the ones that we listed on their estimates in the CIP.
Okay.
Construction only.
And so, on the other hand, the intersection that Commissioner Goldthorpe mentioned, I guess, is it Eagle and Amity? Is that the one?
No, 10 Mile in Amity.
10 Mile and Amity. We're reconstructing a roundabout in a way that expands it, but doesn't waste so much of what was done previously.
President Goldthorpe, Commissioner McKinney, the current project is taking an all-way stop and building a roundabout. And we have designed a multi-lane roundabout, and we've extended those splitter islands in towards the center so that we have a single circulation lane through the roundabout, but we have both approach lanes coming into it. And the outside lane is just a right turn, and the inside lane can circulate through the single circulation lane in the roundabout.
So in any case, essentially it's a 2-lane roundabout, or it can be converted to a 2-lane roundabout, but it's being initially operated as a single-lane roundabout.
That is correct.
Okay. All right.
Don't have to throw away $10 million.
Yes, I like not throwing away money.
Mr. President,
Yes.
Mr. President, I just want to clarify, there's a time frame. It's easy to say throwaway cost. We rebuild intersections after 30 years or 40 years. There's a time threshold. So if we're talking about rebuilding it in 50 years, can one really call that a throwaway cost? Because during that 50 years, the land use will have changed. All kinds of things could have changed. I know I use that term with respect to the rebuild of Collister, because, and frankly, I think there's perhaps $10 million in throwaway costs, perhaps less, perhaps more, because we insisted on building the rebuilding the Collister intersection and paving over the canal, but we didn't know what the transit infrastructure is going to be like. We do know that will be a major transit-oriented development stop with a station. When money becomes available to build that station, the road will have to be rebuilt. So there are throwaway costs associated with that. So we have to make sure when we're talking about this that there are innumerable factors that because of land use, we take additional land and away from the private sector, put on the public sector. So it's a weighing. It's not a single, it's like automatically we have to put $1 million, $10 million in the bank because we have to rebuild this in whatever years that is. I just want that to be clarified. It is not a straightforward discussion, and I think we need to look at these on a site-by-site basis because there's trade-offs. We may never rebuild a roundabout, and yet we've decided to preserve for a big, huge, wide one, and it may be 50 years from now, and everybody in the neighborhood scratching their heads saying, why was this so darn big when this land could have been left on the private sector and produced some property taxes to help maintain it. The wider the roundabout, of course, is the faster you can take it. And we built the Dog Bone roundabout on 36 and Hill Road as a preserved double lane. And that's a great example. I don't think it'll ever be, not in 100 years, be widened, even though we do have preserved on the inside that second lane.
Jim, I think most people that know the area we're talking about with those that list of roundabouts would probably agree that they would be going from into that double lane configuration probably within 20 years or so because of the growth out there. But if we can save that money instead of calling it throwaway costs, I think we got better places to use it right now. Okay, Gary, keep
Good.
going.
So some summary of the impacts of the CIP. To revise the CIP to designate a five-lane road project as a three-lane road project, then you're changing the stated need in the CIP. If the stated need changes to a three-lane roadway project, then the right-of-way that we can purchase through impact fees is limited to that stated need, the 3 lanes. So therefore, to preserve right-of-way for a 5-lane road project while putting a 3-lane roadway project in the CIP, that means we have to use general fund dollars to pay for that additional right-of-way that would take us from 3 lanes to 5 lanes. That's the big impact to wanting to change the CIP.
So what you're saying here is that our future ability to utilize impact fees is eliminated?
Commissioner Goldthorpe, no, I'll go into some more detail
Okay,
here
cool.
and explain. If we artificially constrain the projects in the CIP to 3 lanes, then we then have to also base our project cost estimates on that 3-lane road project, not the 5-lane road project. So that's going to lower our overall CIP project costs, the impact fee eligible costs, and our resulting impact fee rates will be lowered. And that will impact the amount of revenue we collect. So that will in turn raise the general fund obligation, because that will require that the additional right-of-way costs and the future rebuilding of the, I'm still using the term throwaway infrastructure from the interim constrained 3-lane road projects, all have to be paid out of the general fund.
Okay, so in other words, by constraining the way this looks, we might actually have to reduce our impact fees from like $3,400 a house to 32 or something like that.
President Goldthorpe, that's correct. So with your with the 9 recommendations,
Yes, Alexis?
Gary, could you explain just the history around why that is the way it is? Is that state statute, or is there something else that's driving this kind of sequence of events?
President Goldthorpe, Commissioner Pickering, our capital improvements plan is developed to analyze and state the needs, future needs over the next 20 years of the planned future growth in the county and their impacts to our system. So what we historically do is we will project forward what the traffic is based on the future land use plans of the 6 cities in the county, the approved growth total through Compass for the future growth in the county, and where the 6 cities in the county say that growth is going to occur. And that is analyzed by a traffic analysis zone, and all of that data is included in the travel demand model, and we're able to project which roadways are impacted the most or impacted by that future growth. If we decide that if a road segment shows through the modeling that future growth is going to require a 5-lane road, and we choose to put in the CIP that it's only going to need to be a 3-lane road, then we can only charge growth for the cost of that 3-lane road, because that's what we're listing in our capital improvements plan. Because the capital improvements plan is the basis of our impact fee ordinance.
So it's the CIP is connected to the impact fee, but it's not. And so I'm just curious. I mean, I understand that if we're not widening and the project only costs this much, then we're only charging the impact fee to pay for that cost. But that's only for the upfront cost and not for the actual maintenance of the facilities. And so the impact fees then don't cover. Are they not allowed to ever cover maintenance fees?
Right.
Costs?
President Goldthorpe, Commissioner Pickering, they are not by state law, only the initial capital investment.
By state law. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
So we
Mr.
have,
President,
Oh, you just muted yourself? I thought I could go ahead, and then you unmuted yourself again. Okay,
well, I just want to clarify that I was in the legislature when this statute was adopted. As it's been in place for a number of years, it's been changed and altered. And so to assuming that we're going to be locked into some statutory language for 50 years, I think we have to say here we've run up against an issue. I think that the neighborhoods that will be destroyed will be significantly impacted that now have been built out there. That we have to say the statute requires us, if we want to use impact fees to build this 5-lane next to you guys, they would be more than happy, I'm sure, to go with us to the legislature and say, here's some more language we need to clarify so that we can do this in a way that doesn't destroy these neighborhoods. So I think it's important to understand that the constraints are in the statute and in the ordinance, both of which can be changed if necessary. And both of which I think the development community understands that's not as huge a deal. We want to make sure that things are built on a time frame that is appropriate. And if it means preserving for 5 lanes, but not building for 5 lanes for 50 years, then that's fine. Leave it out into the future. But we're required under the statute to build to say this is when we're going to build this stuff or design it within so many years. So I think it's important that we understand that it's within our power to adjust the metrics by which we decide when and how to spend impact fee money. And it's really important, as Commissioner Peregrine points out, if impact fee money, in order to spend it, then creates unnecessary maintenance costs, which are not impact fee eligible, and that's not fiscally prudent.
okay, Steve, would you agree that that the statute would have to be changed in order to allow us that kind of flexibility? I just need to hear this one from the horse's mouth.
Mr. President, Commissioner Steve Price, General Counsel, yes, the statute would need to be changed to allow that kind of flexibility. Also, in terms of the issue about, yes, impact fees will never be able to use for maintenance. It is a capital improvement plan which is statutorily necessary for the impact fees. But also remind you that, like all of us who live in our current homes, the maintenance costs are derived through the gas tax as well as property tax. And so the existing people in those growth areas would be paying for the maintenance obligation, just like we do in existing growth areas. Yes, impact fees don't pay for that, but they do pay for the new capital infrastructure to respond to new growth.
Thank you.
Mr. President,
Yes.
that was really helpful. Thank you, Steve. And I'm just thinking, though, when I've talked to folks, everyone wants new growth to pay for itself. And so there is this nuance where new growth is paying for itself in those initial costs, but not, it seems like, and I'd be really curious if there was an analysis of some sort to see how new growth is paying for itself and how, if it really is going towards the maintenance of the facilities as we're experiencing so much growth. Are there shortfalls in that because we're not allowed to put some of that impact fee money towards the maintenance of these projects? That's it. But thank you, Steve.
Alexis, when there was a presentation made by the Building Contractors Association a couple of years ago about how impact fees supposedly paid for themselves, they had to project it out about 20 years for property taxes to make up for the deficiency of what impact fees would provide today. So don't misunderstand. Our current impact fee level does not pay for the new growth, the impact. Has to go out a long time.
Thank you, Ken.
Okay, President Goldthorpe, So on those 16 road segments and 13 intersections, if we did constrain them to 3 lanes, preserve right-of-way for 5, our impact fee eligible project cost decreased 46 million. General fund right-of-way costs would increase about 10 million. Duplicate or throwaway roadway costs of 24 million. Duplicate or throwaway roundabout costs of 10 million. You're pretty close on what the impact of the single-family dwelling impact fee would be. It's $250. It would go down, not 200. It's an overall decrease in the impact fee rates of about 7.2%, which would be up to $2 million per year. So projected over the 20-year life of the impact of the CIP, we're looking at an impact of about $130 million that would shift to the general fund.
So those segments that you had mentioned earlier that were under review, because it looked like maybe they wouldn't be requiring five lanes, those, if the review shows that that is the case, you would bring back to us in August?
President Goldthorpe, we would bring it back to you in the future. I don't know if it would be in August.
Okay.
But yeah, I'll go through that in detail here in a few minutes.
You know, one other question then. If we don't constrain these sections, but if we do decide down the road that we don't want 5 lanes, and I'm thinking possibly in the area mostly of Highway 16, if we leave it at 5 lanes so that the state doesn't use as an excuse to build something that isn't sufficient, then the state will wind up designing those facilities, the on and off ramps, for a 5-lane roadway. And if they do that before we actually build those segments, then, you know, we still have the flexibility of doing, 3 lanes up to the 5-lane intersection or whatever, correct?
President Goldthorpe, correct. Essentially, if you want to consider building interim 3-lane improvements or single-lane roundabouts, the way to do that is through the programming and an integrated 5-year work plan and not changing the CIP.
Well, that's where I was going with all
you're-
this, the next questions.
Yeah, unless
Okay.
unless you're deciding that we're never going to widen that corridor and you want to constrain it to a specific configuration in coordination with the land use agencies, and you do that again through the master street map, and then we reflect that in the capital improvements plan when we update it.
Well, here's my concern, and that is that future commissions are not required in order to get their bonus, as it were, and I'm kidding here, that they be required to listen or to watch this workshop so that they can understand what it is you just said. Because that makes all the difference in the world, the programming. And until today, actually, starting with last August, but today, it's taken me 6 years to understand this. Because really, we haven't talked about it in this kind of detail. And I'm not blaming anyone. I'm just probably slow, I don't know. But this is important.
Yeah.
Because there are plenty of folks in the valley that would like us to change half of what we do on a permanent basis. And if it's going to kill us because of the statutory restraints placed upon us by the legislature, we're damned if we do and damned if we don't. Thank you.
Okay, so Commissioner Goldthorpe, now I'd like to talk about the master street map and some of the area plans, look at what the planned future system is, remind everybody that we do develop the master street map in full coordination with the cities and Ada County and actually incorporate that into their comprehensive plans. And again, we'll look specifically at Southwest Boise, the Kuna and South Meridian area, and North Meridian. So Southwest Ada County, you see Boise City in the upper right. They're slowly beginning to annex south, and by their comprehensive plan, it shows that they have plans to come south and west. Cuna is heading east and north, and Meridian is heading south and east, and they are slowly encircling that southwest Boise area that is still unincorporated Ada County. And the reason for that is that sewer drives development. The sewer lines have been extended. Their policies in all 3 cities now are that you have to annex to get services. Southwest Boise developed out the way it has through the 2000s with a lot of the new subdivisions because the city of Boise did extend their sewer without annexing, and they've since changed that policy. The roads that are going to serve this area, we've got Orchard heading south from Gowan, which ties into Lake Hazel, which is planned for 5 lanes. Cole Road, south of McLaughlin now, is 2/3 lanes. Maple Grove was planned for 5 down to Lake Hazel. 5 Mile was planned for 5 down to Lake Hazel. We'll get into that in a minute. Cloverdale was planned for 5, Eagle for 5, and then Locust Grove for 3. East-west, Amity is 3. Lake Hazel was 5. Columbia is 2. This is an aerial of that same area. You can see that the big white area in the middle is full of houses. And so that slowly, again, Boise's working its way south and west, and Cuna's coming up from the west heading east and north. Boise City's sewer policy is adopted in 2017, and this is how they publish it. I didn't add the underline in bold, that they do require annexation now prior to allowing any extensions. And it's important to note in condition B that for connections to existing pipelines, sewer will not be provided to any parcel, lot, development, building, or construction that occurs following as a result of the subdivision of land, splitting of land, condominialization of space, or any act that results in creating additional building lots within the boundaries of the parcel.
Is part of that partly due to the huge uproar there was over providing sewer to Fox Ridge? That's on the mountain there below, on the south 5 Mile.
Commissioner Goldthorpe, I don't know that.
Okay.
But what that means is that even where the sewer lines exist, someone can't split their parcel and build another dwelling. So infill development in that area is pretty much non-existent.
Yep.
The Southwest Boise Transportation Study was adopted in 2009, and that was the basis for the Master Street Map lane configurations when it was first adopted, and the capital improvements plans. Obviously, we've amended the Master Street Map a few times, and so we then base the CIP off of those lane configurations. This is the Master Street Map as adopted currently. And like I said before, we are recommending a reevaluation of 5 Mile south of Victory. We believe that this segment of Cole south of Lake Hazel was just an error, that when we changed Cole to the north, we forgot to change this segment to 2 lanes. And Hubbard between Stewart and Cloverdale, I don't know, we think that's probably a mistake as well. So we recommend reevaluating these road segments and coming back to you with that information. This is from the City of Boise's comprehensive plan. You can see this area here is what was formerly called the Syringa development that Corey Barton is developing. It was adopted as a specific area plan. They've got future land use of planned community south of the canal running over to Cloverdale. And this compact area is the dairy, which They've sold off a couple of parcels to the north for Basseri subdivision and have a consultant working on a site plan for the rest of it, which looks like this. So you're looking at a potential of nearly 2,700 dwelling units, which would be served essentially by a 2/3 lane Maple Grove Road up to Lake Hazel and a 2-lane Cole Road up to Lake Hazel.
Gary, so having seen this and just envisioning what could happen with traffic on Maple Grove, in our design process for that segment that we're doing right now, are we going to be concentrating on making it as safe as humanly possible for kids to cross a 5-lane road? Instead of like some of our roads, 5 lanes, you know, part of the reason we're so concerned is that we look at them as being death traps.
President Goldthorpe, yes, with all of our design projects now, we look at those mid-mile crossing points where they're needed, what type of enhancement is needed to make them safe for the use that is going to be there.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. President,
Yes.
yeah, I have a question. So you compare these sort of like 1 square mile areas, you know, you're pointing out south of the freeway, all these areas. If you compare it to a 1 square mile area north of the freeway, especially in the older parts of Boise and Meridian, there are 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 roads within that connect. There are many, many, many connectivity routes. It's a gridded pattern. And yet these development patterns clearly show that there is not connectivity. We're really lucky in some places if we get a mid-mile, meaning one connecting point, and that in and of itself contributes to the volumes that then go and dump on these arterials. Isn't that correct?
You know, I think that before he answers your question, I think that puts it makes it incumbent upon the commission to make sure that doesn't happen. Because as I'm looking there from Amity South on 5 Mile to Lake Hazel, there are all kinds of intersections. And if you go over to Cole, it's the same thing. It's basically up to us to stay on top of things and not drop the ball where that's concerned. And I know that will serve to possibly slow traffic between where children can cross safely. But yeah, I'm just kind of speaking out loud here while my mind is absorbing all this.
Yeah, these aren't. This isn't gridded. They largely will. So it's really the development pattern that creates the congestion on these arterials, because it's not like these are denser than a similar square mile in an old section of Boise Meridian that is gridded. It's the lack of connectivity and the development preference within a neighborhood not to have basically every street being an option for someone to use to connect to their route in or out of the neighborhood. They're designed so that they're separate. One collector, we're lucky to get a collector that sort of collects it up, and it might then put it on a mid-mile collector or onto the arterial. But we simply don't have that, and we don't have the ability to retrofit that if it's gone, which it is, in all of these neighborhoods where there isn't the connectivity. So the congestion, the numbers that are driving and telling us we're going to have these volumes is largely because the decisions were made by land use agencies ages ago that the connectivity wasn't as important.
So Jim, a question for you. We just had a discussion that Ryan led concerning levels of stress for bicycles and pedestrians. Would you suggest that those metrics that are being developed might help at least keep the commission aware of the fact that instead of worrying about a crossing at every single little local street, that there be facilities to safely, a conduit to safely get bicycles and pedestrians that children are driving, or riding anyway, across in better prepared, safer, more designated areas.
Well, yeah, obviously, if the more places somebody can safely cross in a neighborhood, the places they're used to crossing right now to schools and to parks, but as soon as we design it so they can't cross there in order to allow traffic to flow, so that a driver can only expect to stop once or twice every mile, or face a traffic light or a traffic signal that's triggered by a pedestrian. That limits their ability to cross, and people will cross where they cross. It's quite true. You'll still see kids dashing across the street, but that's the way they're designed. It's not like a gridded neighborhood where you can anticipate at every single intersection somebody might be walking or another car might be coming, in which case you have to look out at every single intersection as you go through. So I think we just sort of realize, if we've made the choice, or our land use partners have made the choice, we want really low volumes within the neighborhoods on the local. The trade-off is you just can't move as fast on the arterials as you might want to. It's part of the trade-off, and that the taxpayer shouldn't be expected to maintain a super wide arterial, which ultimately is going to be still slow. It's not because of the cars as much as it is the fact that it's designed to absorb so many cars all on one road. And so our modeling tells us we're going to have all these cars on this road once these things are all built out on this one road, because they don't have another choice. The next choice is a mile down. And so, but that's the trade-off. That's the choice that has been made in those neighborhoods. And if you don't want anyone driving on your local road, your trade-off is that you're going to have slower traffic moving through on these arterials. The widening to 5 lanes is not going to reduce the congestion. It's going to be there. It's a pattern. It's the result of the development pattern. And the more we respond to neighborhoods saying we want safer crossings to these schools and to churches and everything, the more we're going to slow that traffic, and we're going to constantly have that same issue. And then we'll say, well, we need to traffic. The only thing we have some power to do early at this point, once we've widened it out, we aren't going to widen it anymore, is to manipulate the traffic timings and the traffic signals. And we can only do that, very effectively, because we've got obviously traffic going in different directions.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Goldthorpe, getting back to 5 Mile Road, one of the reasons that we believe that it'd be smart to reevaluate this is that growth in this area is going to be incredibly limited based on that sewer policy. You can see how we've got some larger lots. The sewer isn't even extended to all of the lots, so they wouldn't be able to connect if they wanted to. They're not allowed to subdivide. So this is the segment between Amity and Lake Hazel. You got the same thing. South of Lake Hazel, there's even less, the sewer was extended into even less areas of the neighborhood. You can see Charter Point that was developed out in the 2000s that did have it extended, and it actually came all the way down Cloverdale to a quarter mile south of Columbia with the development of these subdivisions. But since they're not annexed, it can't be, these parcels can't annex into the Boise and extend that. So it's going to have to wait for the city to wrap around from the south. This area is pretty much developed out to what it's going to be. And with the aerial on, you can see the southern segments of 5 Mile. It did develop out with front-on housing. This does look like a neighborhood street. If we do ever extend it across the canal, we still would want it to carry lower volumes of traffic and basically just up to the services at Lake Hazel and the commercial area there, and not higher volumes that are taking the longer distance trips. So that's why we believe that we can reevaluate that and come back to you with another recommendation.
All right.
South
Mr.
Meridian
President.
and
Yes?
I have a question. Maple Grove doesn't go over the canal either, and it's not planned to go over the canal. So I don't understand why the analysis wouldn't apply to Maple Grove. That canal basically forms a barrier to the type of growth that's going to happen. It just loops around that corner, and then that's it. We already know what levels of density is going to go in there. It's not very dense. And Maple Grove, even less than 5 miles, is likely to cross that canal. So I don't understand why the same analysis for constraining 5 miles wouldn't also apply to Maple Grove.
President Goldthorpe, Commissioner
Yes.
Hanson, Maple Grove is planned to cross the canal. It is on our master street map. We have preserved right-of-way for that. And it is a more likely connection with the future development shown in Boise's comprehensive plan.
Thank you, Gary. That's good information.
The South Meridian Transportation Plan was adopted in 2009 and updated in 2012, so that has informed the master street map and the CIP in that area. This is the master street map for South Meridian and North Cuna. You can see that we've got a 3-lane Victory Road running east-west. Amity is planned for 5. Lake Hazel is planned for 5. Then Columbia at 3, Hubbard at 3, and Deer Flat at 5. This little segment of Deer Flat, just west of 10 Mile, we believe that was left on the master street map as preserving for 5 lanes by mistake, since Deer Flat will not cross the creek and the railroad tracks. We actually vacated the right-of-way up next to the creek a few years back, so we'll recommend changing that. You can see north-south. Southern segments of Eagle are planned as 3, Locust Grove is 3. Linder we've been preserving for 5, 10 Mile at 5, and then Black Cat at 5 down to Lake Hazel, and then 3 to the south. In the northwest part of the county, you can see in North Meridian, we've got Locust Grove Road at 3 lanes, Meridian Road at 3 lanes, Linder at 5, 10 Mile at 5, Black Cat at 5. We've got McMillan running east-west at 3 lanes, and then Ustick has been planned at 5 lanes. And then crossing the river, obviously we talked about the Linder Road corridor before. We've got build at 5, preserve for 7 across the river, and then we've got 5 lanes up to Beacon Light. And we've been planning Star Road as 5 lanes up to State Street. And then we've got the 3-lane road segments for, or corridors for Floating Feather and Beacon Light running east-west. So looking at some alternatives like we began to talk about before, you know, if the goal is to preserve right-of-way for future 5-lane roads, but to build 2 to 3 vehicle lanes initially, and the pedestrian and bicycle improvements in the near term, you know, the better way of looking at that is through programming and directing us to do that road segments where it makes sense in the integrated 5-year work plan. And through that, we can do that without reducing impact fees and potentially jeopardizing the ability to charge the new development for their impacts to the system. On select road segments, you know, it may be advantageous to widen the pavement when it's rehabilitated and to construct those ped and bike facilities. It would require purchasing the remaining ultimate right-of-way for that 5 lanes at the time that we build the ped and bike facilities, because we'd want to set those back so that they're not disturbed with the future construction. And then you could widen the roadway to 5 lanes in the future as necessary, ideally after we've utilized the life of that pavement. An example, and it's not the best example because this was done prior to the current direction on bike facilities, but when we did the rehab projects on Lake Hazel, this is between 5 Mile and Maple Grove, We widened the roadway to get the center turn lane because we had a lot of intersections in that segment. With other projects, we had sidewalk projects, so we have almost continuous sidewalk. There were a couple of parcels that were left out for various reasons, but this shows an example of what could be considered on select road segments. This is Lake Hazel to the east of Maple Grove. The sidewalks were built with the subdivisions in the 2000s. When we rehabbed the pavement again, we widened that to get the turn lanes at the intersections. And you can't imagine on some road segments you could add the off-street bicycle facilities out next to that sidewalk if we chose.
And this can all be done through programming.
Yes.
Thank you.
Mr. President,
Yes.
Gary, is there a reason, could you go back one more slide for me? So is there a reason, because I typically see bulb outs on, more dense projects. Is there a reason, would bulb outs work for that next slide in particular? Actually, could you move forward one? It's not showing up. Oh, there it goes. Okay. Yeah, I'm just looking at this and I'm just wondering, wouldn't bulb outs have been appropriate for this one, just looking retrospectively? Because we are talking about a lot of these projects. Would bulb outs be appropriate for this type of facility?
President Goldthorpe, Commissioner Pickering, that could be considered. At the time that this was designed and built, the sidewalks existed. The project was a pavement rehabilitation, and so what the project did was just widen the road to be able to get the turn lanes, because this was done at the time that we had extended Lake Hazel over the canal and Orchard up to Gowan. So we increased the volume of traffic on this road segment tremendously with those projects. So we wanted
It's
to
like
get
a
these
parking
turn
lot.
lanes. Yeah. If we were to design this today, we would absolutely look at those local intersections to Lake Hazel and the pedestrian treatments differently. You're correct.
Thank you.
President Goldthorpe, so I show this segment of 10 Mile just as a potential example of a road segment that you could potentially consider such an option for in the future. As you know, we have the intersections up and down that corridor programmed. We have the one under construction today at 10 Mile and Amity. When those intersections are built, if and when the road segments need some sort of maintenance, you can see how, what we have out there, it's probably 22 feet of pavement. We barely have enough room on the edge to put the white stripe. So there isn't room for a bicycle or a pedestrian out there except on the gravel shoulder. So this could be an area where you might consider that in the future as the area continues to develop and we build out those intersections and have a greater demand to get people to their destinations along
Well, I
the
think
corridor.
we've actually had a couple of small discussions about these stretches right here, because CUNA wants to be able to get clear into the major part of the valley, and
Right.
yeah, so that'll happen.
Yeah, and President Goldthorpe, as you know, they've annexed clear north to Amity, just west of 10 Mile.
Yep.
And we have several schools along this corridor. As we move south, we have large swaths where we've acquired the right-of-way as those parcels have developed, and even as landowners sold us the right-of-way before developing the rest of the field.
Yep.
So there is some opportunity here. So some considerations for the commission, doing interim improvements like this are contrary to the direction to go into an area once and build what's needed and not go back. But, in select areas, there's obviously could be a reason to do that. Looking at constructing the pedestrian and bicycle facilities ahead of the ultimate road project, it's not going to be feasible on all road segments. There's a host of existing conditions in different areas. It does have to be looked at on a project-by-project basis. We would certainly want to try and time it right so we get the full benefit of that pavement life if we're doing it with a pavement rehabilitation project and not repaving the road and then coming back 5 years later and ripping it up to build it again. And then, as you all know, from, in many of the areas of the county, it's developing so quickly that some of those segments already exceed our thresholds for a 3-lane road, and we're not going to get the benefit that we need out of that interim improvement.
That's what I was thinking as you were showing that picture of 10 Mile, because that's obviously kind of an old picture, isn't it?
Yeah, it's,
okay.
It's a few years old. So it's a staff recommendation that we reevaluate the road segments and corresponding intersections that we addressed earlier, that we continue to address priority pedestrian and bicycle facility improvements on arterial corridors through programming in the integrated 5-year work plan, and that you could consider programming direction through the master street map as well on select corridors. You've already done that on Beacon Light and Warm Springs Avenue. And we would address any changes in the master street map that impact the CIP with the next update to the CIP or as appropriate, depending on what changes you may make. And so that I would stand for any questions.
Okay, Gary, I appreciate this more than you know. I have, this has been enlightening to me. Was that you, Alexis, or Mary? Mary.
No, it was Mary. Yes. Good to go? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Inselman. This was really helpful. I think it's provided a lot of clarity, especially I hope it was helpful to the new commissioners. I appreciate you laying it all out there about the severe financial implications that the district would suffer if we were to go in and make sweeping changes to our CIP. $130 million of potential throwaway costs. And in my mind, they are throwaway costs because it's a lost opportunity. We're not accessing that money. And then by having to use general funds, then you have that cascading effect on other projects that are not eligible for impact fees. So the impact goes quite a bit beyond just these 9 items that we have on the screen that we're discussing today. It was brought up last August that perhaps the best way to address those 9 items and concerns that Commissioner Goldthorpe presented was to address them with the IFYWP and the MSM, and I'm glad you spoke about the programming today. And I think that's the smarter, less punitive way to move forward on this. So I think staff recommendation is definitely reasonable and prudent for going forward. But thank you very much for laying this all out for us.
Anyone else? Dave?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Just a couple of comments. I think the one of the clear takeaways from this presentation is that, or at least this is my opinion from this presentation, is that it is generally unwise to constrain ourselves in what we, might do in the future, because none of us have a crystal ball that's very accurate. And so I'm generally opposed to putting constraints and saying, oh, we'll never ever make this more than a 2-lane or a 3-lane road, because reality changes, and we've got to be able to adapt to those changes. So that's comment number 1. And comment number 2, and I've seen this before, and it's one of the biggest mistakes that any highway planning agency can ever make, is to not get the right of way well ahead of time, and to let development encroach, and now you're trapped. And I realize that's usually dollars and cents issue, but we've got lots of places in the county where improvements need to be made, and our options for making the improvements are greatly limited because the right-of-way was not preserved back in the time when it could have been preserved at relatively low cost. So I think those are the two most important things that we can do, is make sure that we're preserving our options for the future by getting the right-of-way that we're going to need. And number two, preserving our options for the future by not constraining our presumptions about what is going to be needed in a particular place in the future. We've got to make projections and recognize that even those projections can change and might go up later on. So those are my thoughts.
Thanks, Dave. Are there any more comments? Because we're going to either not entertain any motions and leave the status quo and leave it up to what we've learned today, and for us to be a little maybe perhaps more on the ball, or someone might want to make a motion to do something a little differently. I'll tell you right now, it won't be me.
Mr. President?
Yes.
Yeah. So, as the oldest member of this commission, I have learned about what happens when we tell neighborhoods that this is what you're going to have to live with. And I learned a huge amount early on when the folks organized in Eagle and said, you know what, we know that you're going to tell us the traffic numbers and everything tells us we have to build a 5-lane road on Beacon Light. But you know what? It's more important to build resilience and safety and all the other things that you don't measure into our neighborhoods. And so we would ask that that be constrained. It took enormous amount of organizing, and it wasn't unanimous, but we agreed. The folks in the Barber Valley did the same thing and worked for years and years and years, and they got a first chunk done in 2015, I think it was, and then the next piece they did last year. We need to learn from cities all over our country that it hurts cities and neighborhoods when you build freeways through them, through neighborhoods. We're not a city. We don't do the land use. And so we sort of have the freedom to say, that's not our problem. We're going to build these because our numbers tell us with respect to cars, because we don't measure what it's going to do to your neighborhood. This is what tells us we need to do. And I think that's a huge mistake. I am hearing from neighbors along the Maple Grove, even though I don't represent that area. I do up to Cole Road, 5 Mile, Linder, who are very concerned as they're starting to see, this is what's going to happen. Yeah, they may or may not have been organized. I'm intrigued that the city of Boise is starting to recognize that maybe just sort of doing carte blanche growth beyond its boundaries doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And so they're saying, we're not going to annex you until you have the sewer system connections all done. Of course, if they were running their own road system, they might say the same thing. We're not going to annex you. We're not going to provide city services until you get those roads wide. And those neighborhoods are like, fine, because this is what we want. Neighborhoods should be much more engaged in co-creating what their streets are going to look like. And we can't keep repeating the assumption that congestion comes simply because there's more people driving on cars. Congestion comes from development patterns. And areas where we have development patterns, as I've discussed earlier, that has everybody dumping onto the arterials, means that those are heavily used. You just have to live with it. That's the trade-off. That's the trade-off. If you ask in these in the gridded neighborhoods, they say, yeah, it's not great that strangers are driving through our neighborhood. They have many, 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 many choices to drive through these gridded streets. But as long as we design them so they don't speed, which isn't always the case, then the gridded neighborhoods actually are showing through certainly the market that they are preferable. So I would like to see us move forward with constraining Maple Grove south of Victory to 3 lanes. I don't see there's justification for it, and the design should come up with what should be co-created with the neighborhood. I think the same thing with 5 Mile. So I agree that 5 Mile and Maple Grove, I don't want us to see those neighborhoods divided into 1 mile by 1 mile chunks all over the place. It's too late on some areas. And I think you're learning, and we will hear from the people who live in the Maple Grove area who are now experiencing what it's going to be like north of Victory to have a 5-lane road. It doesn't matter how many crossings are tried, push buttons and whatnot, they're going to realize, whoa, this is what's going to happen to our neighborhood. They live there. They have to put up with everything we do. So I would ask, and in fact, I'll put it in the form of a motion after I finish, that we constrain both Maple Grove and 5 Mile south of Victory to 5 lanes. I don't see
To
why
3
we
lanes.
accelerate results moving up the Orchard development, the 5 Mile rebuild of the bridge and the Linder Bridge, as long as those are done in a way that makes sure that there's safe multimodal transportation, walking and biking on those, and to shift and redo the plan so that those resources that we might have otherwise said, hey, we're going to take your impact fees, by the way, and widen Maple Grove, you can say, well, we're going to take your impact fees now, and we're going to use that to accelerate the rebuild of 5 Mile, and we're going to build a whole new road over the overpass there. And I want to remind you, these are impact fees paid by developers, people who are adding value with their developments, but they aren't in this area. They're being paid for by areas that are going to be impacted by growth, but none of that impact can be mitigated with the fees that they're paying. So we already know that. It's a messed up impact fee system that says you have to give us impact fee money, but we can't spend it to mitigate the impacts of people coming and going to your business or to your housing development in your area, because we've already finished with the roads there. We're building stuff out in the Southwest. That's where your money's going to be spent. That's a huge problem with our impact fee statute, which is why I think just simply saying, well, we have to use this money because otherwise it's throwaway costs. I disagree. I wholly disagree. I think the throwaway cost is destroying a neighborhood where people have invested their life savings, are planning to live for the rest of their lives, raise their children, and they're facing the prospect of being cut off by a 5-lane road in the near future that will make it difficult on them and hurt the resiliency of their neighborhoods. This is an area, that Southwest area, unfortunately, they're sort of left out because they're partly in Boise and partly out of Boise, partly in Meridian, partly out of Meridian. They're in 2 separate school districts. Amity School is right north of Amity Road. South of Amity Road is another school district entirely. So there's lots of overlapping jurisdiction. And the one jurisdiction that covers all of them is ACHC, and our plan is, by the way, to make a lot of their roads basically mini freeways. I think it was a mistake in big cities, and they've learned that. In fact, they're tearing them up in some cities to build freeways through neighborhoods. And I don't want to be part of building freeways through neighborhoods. We already know what the neighborhoods are going to be like. And from an area of town that says, okay, we're not going to, we've constrained roads in other older parts of town. We've constrained them. We're not going to build them out. People understand if you try and drive at 5 o'clock, you're going to sit in traffic for a while. They understand that. They accept that. That's part of the trade-off. So I would like to see Maple Grove south of Victory constrained to 3 lanes and 5 Mile south of Victory constrained to 3 lanes. And I would like to see the Orchard Street project moved up so that we're spending those design and right-of-way acquisition dollars. The same thing on the Linder Bridge over the interstate and the 5 Mile Bridge over the interstate.
Well, I don't
Mr.
think...
President, I just have a question
Sure.
for Mr. Inselman. Have we gotten any sort of input from these areas that Commissioner Hansen has just referenced, that they have objections or concerns about the CIP?
Mary, not particularly about the CIP, but about one of those stretches we have, yes.
Which one,
Maple
Commissioner
Grove.
Goldthorpe, if you could, please? Oh, the Maple Grove.
stretch, yeah.
Okay, yeah, I'm familiar with that. All right, thank you.
Mr. President, Commissioner Steve Price, I just want to, is Commissioner Hansen's motion to amend the CIP, or is it to constrain those corridors within our current programming?
I don't think he's put it in the
So I
form
haven't
of
made a
an emotion yet.
I just was saying that would be my motion to probably move forward at a future date, because we really haven't given the public the opportunity, a future date to have that. You know, we really, it's kind of like, well, this is my input. I'd like to see these added to the staff recommendation so that when we do vote on them, you know, in a couple months, that would be included in that.
Mr. President,
Yes.
I'm a little confused. Can somebody explain? Okay, I understand we're meeting in August. So with the staff recommendation, does there need to be, can someone talk me through, does there need to be a motion? And considering Commissioner Hansen's comments, does that need to be a motion, or can it wait till August? Can I just get some clarity around just these kind of logistical steps?
It can all wait till August. If we do nothing today, then what we've done today is learn a lot that we can apply to what happens in August.
Thank you. I was just confused if we had to do something today that would affect things in August, so that's really helpful. Thank you.
All right. So is anyone going to make a motion? Yes.
So Commissioner Goldthorpe, does that mean we will have an opportunity to vote on changes to the CIP in August? Because we voted on the CIP last August, and we will not typically have an opportunity to do that for another 3 years, nearly 4 years. So I would like us to vote, especially with the input from the new commissioners and from the neighborhood, on changes to the CIP, updating the CIP. In fact, I'd like to see us constantly updating the CIP.
Mr. President, I have another question regarding that. I know we're required to have an update every 4 years, but does it preclude us from coming back to address it? Like Commissioner Hansen just said, we won't have another opportunity for another 3 years.
It absolutely does not. Yeah.
That's
Good
what I thought.
question.
We would have an opportunity. Okay.
All we have
Thank you
to
very
do
much
is
for that
set a
question.
time and a date like we did for today.
All right. That's what I
Correct,
thought.
Steve?
Thank you very much.
Mr. President, Commissioners, that is correct. And if you would like to, today's work session, and it probably isn't appropriate for some of the comments earlier to recommend changes to it, but at the Commission's will, we can come back in the future. If you decide that to be August, that's fine, and we can make a presentation at that time, and the Commission can make decisions on any changes to the CIP.
Mr. President,
Yes.
I would just like to make an appeal that this comes back to us before August, because it seems like there's a lot to discuss and unpack. And I would want to make sure that our communities are brought along as much as possible, and we're able to have a really well-rounded and intentional discussion before we officially vote. Would that be okay?
That's fine, but I would put the burden on the commission to invite whoever you want to watch this work session and then come up with whatever they want to come up with. And if there's enough, and it makes sense, and it doesn't, in my mind, is that we can accomplish everything we want to accomplish through programming if we just won't fall asleep at the wheel. That's easier for me to do than to make make permanent decisions that'll affect us financially down the road so much and so long. I mean, for several years now, what's caused my blood pressure to rise more than anything else has been the unwillingness of those who tie our hands at the legislative level to make it possible for us to be more agile in what we do as an agency. And to tell you the truth, I don't want to do anything that, from our end, that makes us any less agile. just me.
I agree.
And I respect
agree.
that. Yeah, and I'm just wondering since this is my first time, how does it look to provide just those ideas and recommendations? Do I just present that at the commission meeting when we present it in August, or do I share that with staff? Like, what does that look like?
All of the above. I would suggest that you share what you find with staff and that you share it with whoever the commission president is. And I'm sure if they're reasonable, we'll schedule it either in another workshop with the ability to take an action item all the way through, or on a hearing, which is where we can also take public input. The reason we didn't schedule it so we could take public input today was because I absolutely knew that there wasn't anything that most of us have not already heard many times that would come to us, and I'm glad I didn't, because it seems to me that we're all much better educated towards what we need to do in the future to make either programming work better or make more educated recommendations for the CIP. And I see that I said something wrong.
No, Mr. President, Commissioners, if and when you do consider any changes for a CIP, it'll be a two-step process. Really, that action item would be to direct staff to make those changes. There is a statutory process to go through any changes to the capital improvement, and we would have to follow that, and that would be the second stage.
See why I got in trouble in August? Okay.
President Goldthorpe?
Thank you.
President Goldthorpe?
Yes.
I just wanted to make a comment. Going back and reviewing our meeting last August, I felt like I was on the handball court with all the substitute motions flying, but in the end, I think we had a great discussion. Everybody was in good humor, and the thing that stuck out to me and made me proud of our efforts was that we ended up with a unanimous decision coming out of that. And it didn't start that way when we went in, but we were able to discuss it amongst the five of us, and we had a plan going forward, and being here today is part of that plan. So to Commissioner Pickering's comment about the best steps forward, I think anytime we have these type of items before us that have such sweeping consequence, that we have a good, robust discussion amongst the commissioners. I don't think we can ever go wrong by doing that, and I would like to see us do more of that, actually. But I thought that was a good meeting, so thank you. Just wanted to share that.
Thanks, Mary. I think you've seen a lot of additional work sessions this year, haven't you? Okay.
Which is good.
Yeah, it is. Anybody else have something to say? The
I just
director
want to
has.
thank you,
Mr. President,
Gold-
Commissioners, I would like to remind you all that in this journey that you're going to be going on, as we do annually for the budget and the integrated 5-year work plan, you will have multiple public steps and touches on this to focus the programming perspectives that you want, focus the different additions or subtractions that you want. But this is not something that will come to the commission on August 30th and then September, whatever it is, here. There's plenty of opportunities, and we will ensure, as we have in the past and we continue to in the future, that the public is well informed of those dates, times. As we said earlier, my intention is to continue, even if you're here present, the Zoom process of this of the commission, because it does touch so many more people, gives more people the opportunity. So it is a very public process. You will have ample opportunities to go back and forth to ensure that we're following your directions on budget, integrated 5-year work plan, and programming.
Thank you. Yes, as much as I dislike Zoom, we have had probably at least 3 times as many people attending our meetings as we ever have in the past. Gary, do you have anything else?
President Goldthorpe, I just wanted to thank you.
Okay, Jim.
Oh, yeah. So I really appreciate this, President Goldthorpe. We were poised to discuss this the CIP, and as you know, none of my comments are new. My concerns about the CIP go back many years. And last summer was the first time I actually voted in favor of moving forward on it. But I did so because of your pledge and your commitment to do this. And I think that's very important because I think it's so important to me. This is, as it were, like the nuclear core of all the energy we put into everything else. Because when this is set and obligates so many of our tax dollars, it drives so much more. And so I really appreciated you scheduling this and your continued commitment to looking at continuing to educate ourselves on the long-term impact of what the CIP does and its impact on everything else we do. Thank you, President Golpa, very, very much.
Well, thanks. And if we do anything wrong, I'll just blame it on Dave. Just kidding, folks. Okay, then, anyway, I doubt we're going to have a motion for anything, so we will now, we're adjourned as far as the work sessions.
President Goldthorpe, quick question. I don't know if you were adjourning the whole meeting, but were we not going to discuss the survey? Our thoughts on the survey today was the deadline?
That was not for today. I talked about that with the director yesterday, and that'll be coming up real quick. But we will be adjourned and get ready for about a 5-minute break before we start an executive session.